Dr. Will Bulsiewicz, welcome back to the Plant Yourself podcast.
Oh my gosh, Howard, it's an honor. It's an honor to come on your show. And, I'm excited and I love I hope for the people who are listening to just the audio, if you get a chance, you have to check out the visuals because Howard has a wonderful goatee. And it's very, man, do you have a Harley Davidson? I'm curious.
Uh,
You
I,
look like you need one.
I have a Husqvarna sewing machine.
Nice. That's like me driving a minivan.
Yeah.
You know you've arrived.
Yeah, no, this is, I started growing it. We were on vacation in South Africa, and then we were in lockdown in South Africa. And
Oh gosh.
I just felt like I had to become more of a badass.
Yeah.
And I lost my razor, so it all dovetailed.
So you became the American badass, is what you're saying.
Yeah, and now I'm back here, and I'm waiting for the roving gangs
The
of
militia?
the militias with the Confederate flags and the AK-47. So I figured
Yeah.
a little facial hair could maybe.
The chances of that happening are much higher today than they were 3 months ago. That's for sure.
Yeah, yeah, I see patterns anyway. So
Yeah.
before we talk about your book, I got to ask you. You look fantastic. You looked good when we podcasted, I think, a year or two ago. But are you like 17 now? Do they call you Doogie? Like you look so radiantly healthy.
Oh man, we're just buttering each other up here on the Plant Yourself podcast. Um, I feel great. I mean, I feel great. I'm turning 40 in like 2 months. And I feel, and I wrote about this in the introduction of the book. I feel younger today than I did at 30. And I
Hmm.
credit a plant-based diet. And, I mean, frankly, truly, Howard, I practice what I preach. And I'm doubling down here during the COVID-19 crisis. I'm doubling down on the concepts in my own book because I really actually think that that's the way that you can protect yourself.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm just bringing my notes up because I took lots of notes um, to ask you about. So what I want to say about the book is I will. This is the book that I will be recommending to everyone who wants to get started, and it's changed. I read it like yesterday, like in preparation for this conversation, and it has already changed my approach to helping people get healthier. So I mean, I can't tell you how many wonderful books I've read that all say essentially the same thing from a different perspective. So from the perspective of heart or cancer or here's some recipes, but basically I get tired of reading books about plant-based health, right?
Hmm.
And so I kind of was worried that this was going to be another one and we were just going to, and it was totally different. And so I'm really excited to get into that with you.
Yeah.
So
Because I'm honestly curious what you mean, like what parts stood out as different to you. I mean, I guess we could talk about it through this conversation if you want, but
yeah,
that gets me excited.
so the first thing is you cut through a lot of confusion. There is so much, there's everybody in the plant-based world, all the doctors have sort of their different protocols. So you've got, McDougall, Furman, Esselstyn, Campbell, Barnard, and everyone's saying slightly different things. And people, get into camps. And so one thing that you said is like, here's the golden rule of eating. And it's not, 16 servings of steamed kale a day. And it's not tons and tons of starches. And it's a deep, more fundamental prescription. Maybe let's
Mhm.
start there. So tell us what the golden rule is.
Well, Howard, from my perspective, I have grown so tired and frankly sympathetic towards the people who are fed these fad diets where for the last 20 years, what we've been told is that the solution is restriction. I mean, there are people who, I mean, I'll be honest, they are self-titled gut health experts, and they're never gastroenterologists. They're never formally trained. And they will say that the way to optimize your gut is if the food causes gas, bloating, or any sort of discomfort, then it must be inflammatory and you have to get rid of it. And I've grown so tired of this because, we are driving people insane. We are driving people insane with our laundry lists of forbidden foods, with our lists of, food monsters or ingredients that kill people. We're freaking everyone out over like, can I eat this? Can I not eat this? Is this going to kill me? The macros, the weighing the food, the calorie counting, it is getting absolutely ridiculous, and it's so unneeded. And the idea of restriction is a flawed idea because science is showing that actually causes damage to the microbiome. The way that it works is this: your gut thrives on fiber. Fiber is found in plants. But fiber is not some generic entity. Fiber is biochemically unique. Whatever plant you pick up and hold in your hand, that plant has unique types of fiber. If it's black beans, there are certain types of fiber within the black bean. And those unique types of fiber feed specific bacteria that live in your microbiome. They are picky eaters. They don't all like the same food. Your microbes are picky. They like specific types of fiber from specific types of plants. So the point is this: we want our gut to be thriving and teeming with as much diversity as possible. And in order to optimize the diversity within our microbiome, we need diversity of fiber, which we inherently get when we eat a diet that has a diversity of plants. And it's not just, hey, Dr. B, that's a cool idea. I like that. For me, I wouldn't be sitting here and like basing my entire book on this one concept just based upon a cool idea. That's hogwash. I need to have real science. I'm a scientist just like you. And so when we look at the largest study to date to answer the question, what is it about our diet and lifestyle that predicts the healthiest gut possible? When the American Gut Project tried to answer this question, what they revealed was the clear-cut number one predictor of a healthy gut microbiome is the diversity of plants in your diet. So the point is this: throw out the forbidden foods. Throw out the macros and the calorie counting and the weighing your food. And let's get back to one rule. That's it, one rule. Diversity of plants. Let's maximize, let's have abundance. Let's get as much variety. And when it's real food, your body thrives when you're eating real fruits, vegetables, whole grains, seeds, nuts, and legumes.
Right. So what I loved was the metaphor of, so the gut is a muscle.
Yeah.
Right. And so because this was like the mind blower to me that, I always felt like, well, if you have a sensitivity to that, then you shouldn't eat it.
Right.
It's like that joke. Like, does it hurt when you get, when I hit you on the head? Is it good? Try not to get hit on the head. But you say it's more like you injure your knee and you put it in a cast, and then because it's injured, you never move it again. Or, right. And so that explained to me why so many people have sensitivities to foods. It's because, as you said, we have 17 enzymes to digest starch, and so we outsource most of our digestion to the microbiome. And so if we fired them all, if we've laid them all off because they didn't have enough work, because we weren't eating those foods, and we bring them back in, then we feel bad, and we assume that that's proof that we shouldn't be eating them.
Right. Yeah, it's kind of like, so just to unpack the analogy a little bit, the idea is that your gut is a muscle. And what that means is it can be trained. So if it's weak, we can make it stronger. And a person who has a damaged gut, that's like them trying to rehab that muscle. So when you're rehabbing something, you're not going to the gym and lifting, 300 pounds when you're in the rehab process. When you're in the rehab process, you're going to the gym and you're grabbing 2.5 pounds. And maybe next week you get to 5. if things go well, or maybe you stay at 2.5. But the key is that people are not stuck or locked in with digestive disorders or food sensitivities for the rest of their life. They can get it back. Your gut adapts to the diet that you present to it. What that means is that if you cut beans out of your diet entirely, why would your gut be good at processing beans? So it gets weaker and weaker and weaker and worse at processing beans. And then one day you get tired of the paleo diet and you decide that you want to reintroduce the beans. And I'm just going to tell you right now, you're going to struggle in the beginning. And that's effectively, like you said, that is effectively the equivalent of not walking for 3 months and then deciding one day you want to stand up and start walking again. It's not going to be that easy, and your gut is going to adapt to whatever you present to it. And I kind of think of like this too. Let me extend the analogy even further, Howard. And I didn't actually put this into the book, but I think that it's relevant. I played sports when I was in high school. And in the fall, it was soccer. And in the winter, it was basketball. And I would be in great shape for soccer season. And then I would transition to basketball. And I would feel like the wind got knocked out of me for about 2 weeks.
God, 5-on-5 full court is killer. I don't care what kind of shape you're in.
Yeah. You're using different muscles and it's a different game. Soccer is about long runs where you sustain and then you get to walk around a little bit. Basketball is about like spurts, like you go, stop, go, stop, go, stop. Yeah. And so it's a different.
I remember how miserable I felt when like the ball went in. Like,
yeah.
Oh, we're on offense. We've got the ball. Someone makes the shot, and I'm like, damn it.
So, but I remember it would take me a couple of weeks to adapt to basketball because you're using different muscles and the same. So it's conceptually the same thing. When you exercise, you build up endurance and strength for the specific stuff that you've been doing. And just because you build up endurance and strength doesn't mean that you can just switch over and do something radically different immediately. You need to start to adapt when you start to introduce something new. And so that's true with our diet too. If we start to change our diet, we need to be prepared to adapt our diet and ease our body into it.
Right. And so the first mind-blowing thing was we can learn how to eat foods that have been bothering us. The second was we should. Like this, like as you said, because of this diversity, there's the more diverse our plant-based diet, the more diverse our microbiome, and the more protective it is.
100%. So, your gut is an ecosystem. Now that sounds weird to say that because it's like, to the people listening at home, you're like, gosh, it's like inside of me right now, right? Your gut is an ecosystem to the same degree as the Amazon rainforest. If you go into the Amazon rainforest, and I'll be honest, like I don't like snakes. They terrify me. I had a bad snake incident when I was like 3. I was going to the bathroom in a stream with my dad. We were outside and I was going to the bathroom and a snake came after me.
Ooh.
And then I started having nightmares. Yeah, I was 3 years old. So anyway, I don't like snakes. I don't like mosquitoes. But if you go into the Amazon rainforest and you get rid of all the snakes and the mosquitoes, you're going to leave a hole in the ecosystem that you probably are not going to be able to fill in. We need the diversity within the ecosystem. And the same rule that's true for the Amazon rainforest is true for your gut too. You want as many different species as possible because each species plays a role in supporting your bodily function. You want them all on board. And that's where having a wide variety, diversity of plants helps to support and sustain all of them.
All right. So you begin the book by just introducing the microbiome, and you and I had already had a conversation about gut health and microbiome, but I learned a lot from the book that I did not know, or maybe I'd forgotten. So I have some notes here that I want you to talk about. So one of the notes I wrote, and I did this on my phone on a little app, so I didn't make them very loquacious. Diaper studies predict asthma.
It is insane. Okay, so just to unpack this for the people who have never heard one of my podcasts before and have not listened to our first one. I mean, by all means, please feel free to go back and listen to the first one. But
And you also, I saw you also did one with Rip for.
I did, yeah, and it just came
Yeah,
out. It
yeah.
actually just came out.
I didn't get a chance to listen to it, but he's a fantastic conversationalist, so I'm sure that one's worthwhile too.
Yeah. And so, the fascinating thing about our gut microbiome is that there are these bacteria that cover us from the top of our head to the tip of our toes, but they're concentrated within our colon, which is the large intestine. We have literally 38 trillion microbes living inside of our colon. That is 100 times the number of stars in the sky. And that's inside of each one of us. And they live in there in harmony and balance, and they play a role in human health in a very powerful way. They are more than just digestion. They are connected to our immune system. 70% of our immune system lives in the gut. They're connected to our mood. 90% of serotonin, the happy hormone, is produced in the gut. Connected to our metabolism, to our hormonal balance, and even how we express our genetics. So in this particular study that you're asking me about, we're talking about the connection between our gut and our immune system. All right. We know that 70% of the immune system is in the gut, and there is literally a single layer of cells that is so thin that the human eye can't even pick it up. We can't detect it without a microscope. And on the other side of that single layer of cells are 38 trillion microbes. So they are right next to each other, and they're talking to each other. And what we've discovered is that the gut microbes and our immune system are completely intertwined in a way that you can't separate them. So here's the study to demonstrate this. This is why I included this study, because I wanted to demonstrate how connected our gut microbes are to our immune system. They took children who were 3 months old. Okay, guys, this is going to sound like science fiction. This is completely real. This is a completely real study. They took children who were 3 months old, and they stole their diapers. I mean, I don't know that they literally stole their diapers. They had to, I guess, get approval to actually do this. But
yeah, I'm sure the IRB
that would be against the rules of the IRB. So
dumpster dive.
They took stool specimens from 3-month-old children, and they analyzed the stool specimen to get a window into the gut microbiome. And based upon this, they were able to predict which children they thought would go on to develop asthma, not like that they actually have asthma. They were able to identify who are the children who are going to develop asthma years from now. Looking at the stool of a 3-month-old child, they could predict who's going to develop asthma years from now. And then the question comes to mind, okay, so the gut, the microbes are different, okay? Basically what I've just told you is that the microbes in a child who's going to develop asthma years from now, they're different. But is it the microbes? Is it the microbes that actually cause the problem?
Right. So it might just be correlation. There's some other cause, and the people who have asthma also tend to have this microbial signature because of something else.
Maybe the asthma causes the microbial signature, right? So, the question is causation. And so they took stool specimens from the children who they predicted would develop asthma years later. Again, they don't have asthma right now. They're predicting that they're going to do it years later. And they took these stool specimens and put it into germ-free mice. And when they did this, the germ-free mice developed asthma.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know, what does mouse asthma look like? It was just like it became clear that it was harder to breathe, or
Well, so in medicine, we'll call this reactive airway disease.
Uh-huh.
And asthma is an allergic phenomenon. All right, but it behaves very similar to emphysema or chronic obstructive pulmonary disease.
Okay.
Where a person, you can tell someone has asthma or chronic obstructive pulmonary disease because they are wheezing like crazy, and many times you don't even need your stethoscope. You just hear them wheezing.
Okay.
Right. So with these mice, the same would be true, is that there are certain findings that with a stethoscope in a mouse, you could basically hear And then there's a test that you could do in either humans or in animals. There's tests that you can do to test how much the airways are reacting.
Mm-hmm.
And that
Okay.
tells you that there's asthma present.
Gotcha. So the link here is with an immune system that's either like hyper overreactive. So like with an allergy, right? This is bad when it isn't. And so it's the allergic reaction causes the problems, or also autoimmune, which is the immune system starts attacking the body, right, instead of something else. So how do the microbes interact with the immune system in those two scenarios?
So what we have seen is that if you look at these conditions, and in the book I call them immune mediated. So, but just to unpack it, what you just said, allergic is asthma or eczema, or allergic rhinitis, like people that have sinus issues. And this is basically the body reacting to some outside stimulus. All right, that's an allergy, like seasonal allergies. It's reacting to pollen. Whereas, as you said, autoimmune, it's attacking the body in all cases. So I started coming up with like, okay, let me name every single autoimmune condition that I can possibly come up with. Let me name all of them. And then let me start going through and finding whether or not there's a connection with the gut. And every single one that I found where they studied the gut microbiome in the setting of these allergic and autoimmune diseases, every single one, there was evidence of damage to the gut microbiome in all cases. I couldn't identify an allergic or autoimmune disease where when they studied the gut microbiome looked normal. I couldn't find that.
And when you say damaged, what do you mean?
So the term that we would use is dysbiosis. Dysbiosis basically refers to a loss of balance of the microbes. So normally speaking, you should have a combination of, and this is, I'm using layman's terms, I'm keeping it super simple, but you should have a combination of good guys and bad guys. All right. And they live in harmony and balance. And there's enough good guys outnumbering the bad guys that the bad guys really can't do anything crazy. So we call that eubiosis. That's harmony and balance. If you start taking species away, when you start losing diversity, you destabilize the environment and you create an opportunity for the bad guys to emerge and become more powerful. And you lose the harmony and balance between the good guys and the bad guys. Now the bad guys are out competing the good guys. And when you have that, this is where what we call dysbiosis. And because you have lost that harmony and balance that's supposed to be there, and because you have lost the species that were originally there, now you have a scenario where the gut microbiome is no longer capable of doing its job in the way that it was supposed to. And also, it is far more inflammation provoking or inflammation producing. Well, what is inflammation? Inflammation is activation of the immune system, which is what allergic and autoimmune disorders are.
So I want to take a little detour into the current events and the COVID-19 pandemic, because I've been hearing a lot about immune system. I was reading about the 1918 Spanish flu, where the second wave attacked people with healthy immune systems. Like, do we want a healthy immune system now? Or what does that even mean when there's this, coronavirus? Like, should I ease off? Like, I was a little bit worried, like, should I work out really hard? Because that'll, suppress the immune system a little bit. Like, what's your take?
I actually think that the answer is quite clear, but it's defining it a little bit differently than perhaps you may see it defined, in the mainstream media or on a blog from someone who doesn't truly know what they're talking about.
Those exist? I'm shocked.
They're the loudest voices out there.
I'm shocked.
They're the loudest voices out there, and they have the most time to produce blogs. So what we want is the immune system is our defense. It's our shield. Look, in a perfect world, I don't want to be exposed to COVID-19. I mean, I'm going to be as cautious as I can, right?
Right.
But there's limitations to what we can do because, I mean, truly, the COVID-19 is not just going to go away. It's going to be a part of what is going on for the foreseeable future. And so we have to think about our body and how do we optimize our defenses? How do we basically develop our shield against this virus? And what I see that I feel is a mistake is to talk about you need a bigger immune system, or you need a stronger immune system, or this heightens immunity.
Mm.
Okay. Bigger is not necessarily better. What we want is we want precise. We want targeted. Okay. We want precise, we want targeted, we want optimized. Those are the words that I would use to describe it. And I think that there's a study that I would like to share that gives you an idea of what I mean by all this. And by the way, this is not in the book because the book I was done writing it well before COVID-19 emerged. But the key for people to understand is that there is a direct line, a direct connection between your diet, your gut, and your immune system. Those three things are in a chain with one another, and you cannot separate them from each other. They're a part of it. So something that starts off as your food is going to affect your microbiome one way or the other, and that's going to affect your immune system one way or the other. And you can optimize your immune system with your diet. So they did a study, and by the way, I think that you know this about me, Howard, but just for the people at home, like I am not advocating for animal-based research. I'm not advocating that we do that or that we be casual about this, but I'm just sharing the results of the study. They did a animal study looking at a high fiber diet versus low fiber diet in the setting of respiratory viruses. And in this case, it was the influenza virus. Mm-hmm. And they wanted to see what happened. And the scientists predicted that the high fiber diet, that the mice would actually do poorly because fiber is anti-inflammatory. So what they thought was, oh, fiber is going to put the brakes on the immune system and then you can't even fight the virus. Mm. That's what they were worried. So nonetheless, they've moved forward with the study. This is why you have to do the research and you can't just have ideas. So they moved forward, and what they found shocked them. It was the opposite. It was the polar opposite. The mice that got the high fiber diet lived longer with less symptoms, and they actually measured respiratory function. They actually measured how well their lungs were doing, and they had better lungs. And so the scientists were so perplexed that they went back to the drawing board and said, well, why did that happen? We need to understand. And the answer to the question is this. This is the sequence of events that was unfolding. This is what they discovered. Fiber feeds the microbiome. The microbiome thrives and grows stronger when you feed it fiber, and then it takes that fiber and transforms it into short-chain fatty acids. Perhaps people have heard of butyrate, acetate, propionate. I have an entire chapter in my book about short-chain fatty acids because I'm obsessed with them, because I think we should stop talking about lectins and start talking about what actually matters in our health, which is short-chain fatty acids. And so they discovered that fiber was interacting with the gut microbiome and producing short-chain fatty acids. The short-chain fatty acids got into the bloodstream from the gut, left the gut, entered the blood, and traveled to the lungs. And in the lungs, the short-chain fatty acids recruited the CD8 cells. CD8 cells are the exact cell that you want to fight the virus. You are getting the right soldiers on the battlefield. Mm-hmm. But the rest of it that's key is we don't want more immune system. We want optimized and precise and targeted. So now we are targeted, but we also want to be precise and not overshoot and overdo it.
Right. In other words, we don't want a carpet bomb.
We don't want a carpet bomb. We don't want to just pull out all our bombs at once and just go nuclear. Okay? Because nuclear, what that means is you are overactivating the immune system. And for the people at home who haven't heard about this, most of the people who die of COVID-19, most of them, not all, but most of them are dying of respiratory failure with a condition called acute respiratory distress syndrome, ARDS. ARDS is not actually elicited directly by the infection. It's a consequence of the infection, overactivating the immune system.
So is that the
And then
cytokine storm?
that's right. So the virus activates the immune system excessively, causing a cytokine storm. The cytokine storm is basically your immune system going nuclear.
Mm.
And when it does that, it breaks down the barriers that exist in the lungs, and the lungs start to fill up with fluid. And now you can't even get oxygen into the blood because the lungs are filled up with fluid. It's like having a pneumonia, except the pneumonia involves all parts of the lungs on both sides, which is a scary thing.
Mm-hmm.
When that happens, the only way to keep a person alive, it's impossible to survive without a respirator in that setting. You need a respirator to survive. It's the only way. So now that is an overactive immune system. We don't need an overactive immune system. We don't need a bigger, stronger immune system. We need an optimized immune system. And in this study with the mice and the high fiber diet, the short chain fatty acids got the CD8 cells on the battlefield, but it kept the rest of the immune system at bay. So basically what it did is it dialed up the right part and it dialed down the rest of it, which is exactly what you want to happen.
So a word that comes to mind for that phenomenon is intelligence. So would you say that our gut microbiome, I mean, it's so weird to think of like these microscopic creatures that live for a couple of days and end up in our toilet are like, I guess individually we wouldn't say, oh, that's, I want to, have a conversation with that lactobacillus, but as an organism, are they intelligent?
They are not intelligent, but they are dynamic. They are constantly changing. And the key is that they are a part of human evolution from day one. There was never a moment in human history where we were sterile. There was never a moment in human history where we did not have a microbiome. We always did. And so we rose and we fell together through millions of years. And so because of that, if we ended up in a situation where we survived and lived long enough to procreate because of our gut microbiome, then that basically meant that those gut microbes carried forward. It's the term that we would use is coevolution. When we talk about human evolution in isolation and we ignore the microbes, we're ignoring an important part of the entire conversation.
Right. Well, I want to push back a little bit though, because I'm really rooting for them to be intelligent. So let me make my case that so there's in sort of philosophy, there's this idea of an emergent phenomena, where so basically this sack of meat and bones has consciousness, and we don't know where it lives. We can't point to the place in the body where consciousness lives or what generates it, but it somehow has emerged. And I'm wondering whether, the microbiome, like you talk about the Hasda, who have different microbiomes in the fall and the spring, or the fall and, the fall and the winter based on the food that's available. Would you say like the microbiome as part of our, I guess, superorganism? Like we think of our brains as being the intelligent part, but I can tell you as a health coach, our brains are the dumbest part of us most of the time. Like if you knock someone out, their body almost always does the most right, appropriate thing. Yeah. Right. When we're sleeping, but when we're awake, we eat shit. We, not literally. We, we do all sorts of self-destructive behaviors, and we think that that's us. But there's another, like the microbiome also has a lot of opinions. And can, if it's the right microbiome, it seems to send us in the right direction. Like you talked about, like the microbiome can actually change our behavior.
Yeah, well, there's early studies that suggests that our gut microbiome controls our cravings, that our gut microbiome is, it's almost sensational to talk about, but I can't, these are real studies that our microbiome produces pheromones, which are sex, scents. Like it's what you use to attract a partner. That
would make sense from an evolutionary perspective, wouldn't it? Like like we're not dogs sniffing each other's assholes, but you want to find out if somebody else is healthy, right?
Well, and that was one of my favorite parts of my book is the part where I talked about why do we kiss? Why do we kiss? And the answer why is because they've now shown that you are exchanging microbes with the person, and basically you're checking compatibility with the person. That's our way of doing it.
That's amazing. I mean,
Yeah.
it's so much better than, Tinder profiles, right?
I think, to answer your question, is the microbiome smart? Okay, on an individual basis, these microbes they're single cellular, so it's hard for me to make a compelling argument that they are on an individual basis smart, right?
Right, right. And I wasn't arguing that either.
But when you take them as a conglomerate, when you take them en masse, and there's 39 trillion of them, they are truly an organ. They are an organ that is dynamic, that is adaptable, that is powerful within our body. And, we can call it smart because it works the way that it's supposed to, or you can call that highly evolved, whichever you feel more comfortable with. I think we're talking about the same thing. But basically what it is it reacts in the right way to try to promote our survival when possible. And, I think to your point, by the way, Howard, I want to say that, I don't know that I'm on necessarily a religious show here. And I'm here and I'm talking about, millions of years of human evolution. But let me just be frank and say that as a doctor, I believe it was Nietzsche who said that, basically science creates the absence of God because you don't need to believe in God when science has an explanation. Mm-hmm. Right. So I understand what he was saying, but that was like the 19th century. And I honestly think the more that I learn, the more that I realize how perfectly made we are. And that makes me believe in a God. Because I'm just like, how is this so perfect? It just makes sense. The way the body works just makes sense. And it's like you said, on so many levels.
Yeah. It reminds me of a story I heard long ago. There's a story about a Native American storyteller telling the story about why the trees lose their leaves. And he's talking about, all the little critters who needed help, and Creator looked down and said, oh, well, which of the trees wants to lose their, to protect the little ones in the winter. And so, elm and maple and oak, elm and maple agree right away. And so they get the, Creator gifts them the most beautiful fall colors. And then oak does it later, so it gets less, And so then there's a skeptic listening. It says, no, that's not it. It's, let me explain about photosynthesis and all that. And it goes through the entire scientific explanation, and the storyteller is beaming and says, see how hard Creator works to protect the little ones?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that, well, not to get philosophical, but I feel like when you and I get on these podcasts together, we always do anyway. So I feel like humans, we think that we're intelligent. Perhaps that's because among the, animals that live on this planet, we have the most intelligence. But it always seems like when we try to engineer stuff, we always mess it up. Nature is so much smarter than we are. And I feel like this COVID-19 crisis is proof of that. I feel like the damage that we're doing to our environment is proof of that. I feel like, our food system is proof of that. We try to engineer our food system, or we try to engineer our diet. Like, why don't we just go back to eating real food? Fruits, vegetables, whole grain, seeds, nuts, and legumes. Like, why is this so complicated?
Yeah, it reminds me of a quote by my favorite comedian, Emo Phillips. I think it was something like, I used to think that the brain was the most wonderful organ in my body. Then I realized who was telling me this.
There you go. Fair enough.
Like that, we think that the project is command and control. Like, the more we control, and that's my beef with science, really, is that it's become science, like in the time of Darwin and even, Einstein, it was, let's explore what the world is. And it feels like now it's become a project of control and manipulation. And everywhere we do it, it's like you talked about the history of antibiotics. Like, there are these unintended consequences to messing with really robust, resilient, anti-fragile systems that, we think, oh, great, we've got rid of the bugs. Right now, oh, great, we got rid of the snakes and the mosquitoes.
Right.
And the absence, the vacuum is never filled by what we think it's going to be filled by.
Yeah, no, I think you're completely right. I think that we have this superiority complex. We think as humans that we are meant to dominate our environment. And that was one of the points of my book that I hope people pick up on as they read it, because it's sort of subtly woven in there in a couple of chapters, which is that we are part of our environment. We are not the dominant creatures. We are not the king of the world. We are a part of this complex nature, and we're just a piece of the puzzle. We're just one piece, and we need to learn to accept that and have more respect for all the other pieces, because you can't really have a full, complete puzzle if we're destroying the other pieces.
Right. And I didn't understand this about the microbiome until very recently, but I've been a gardener for a long time. And I understood that the project of gardening was not, till the soil, grow food, take it out, and then now there's less nutrients in the soil, so buy fertilizer at the store, and now there's less diversity in the soil, because the fertilizer only feeds certain bits of it. And so now I got to bring in pesticides, herbicides, and fungicides, right? Like I understood that what I was really growing was healthy soil, and that everything else came out of that. That reminded, when I'm reading your book, that reminded me, like, what we're trying to grow, like the goal of eating and of human living is our microbiome. Like you take care of that and it takes care of the rest.
That's true, and it's just a part of the circle of life, which is that there's this circle where the soil has its own microbiome. So let me say this: all life on this planet, all life, whether animate or not, either has a microbiome or is a part of a microbiome. Okay, so the plant in your garden has a microbiome. One of the things that I discuss in the book is, like, take an apple, for example. The apple tree has a microbiome. The microbiome of the apple tree is helping to basically grow that fruit from, basically from seed to flower all the way to the full mature fruit. And it's adapting. And then you pluck that apple off. And studies are now showing us that that apple has more species than we do as humans. And it has 100 million microbes. And the location of the microbes is, to me, quite fascinating. It's not where you would think they would be. People would think they'd be on the skin, on the surface. Believe it or not, they're actually predominantly in the core, which is the part that we throw out. Oh. So, but, all life either has a microbiome or is a part of a microbiome. Your soil has a microbiome. My concern with glyphosate, the herbicides, is that we're destroying the soil microbiome. When you destroy the soil microbiome, it can affect the plant microbiome. When you affect the plant microbiome, you are affecting our food system, and that affects our microbiome and our health. And it's part of this entire circle that is all running together. And this is where, I feel like we need to see, how we need to start to understand that we as humans need to fit into this larger system. And the challenge, Howard, is that we are putting a strain on this planet because there are 7 billion of us right now. Okay. And if you go back to 1900, there were 2 billion. And in 1800, there were 1 billion. We have 7 times the amount of people that were around in 1800. And in 2050, they expect that number to be 10 billion. What that means is that in 250 years, we have gone from 1 billion to 10 billion people on this planet. And there is a breaking point where our planet is not going to be able to sustain the number of people that we put on it. And it makes you think that the virus might be, the virus feels like it could be our planet fighting back.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting because, like, to talk about population, being concerned about population is a dog whistle to the progressive political movement to say, oh, you're for eugenics or population control, and but they're looking at it from a very like simply geopolitical, like, is there enough land for everybody? They're not looking at it from your perspective of entire ecosystems.
Well, and particularly when you think of the strain that we put on the planet when not only do we go from 1 billion to 7 billion people, but we also take those people and we start consuming unprecedented amounts of meat. Because basically, and we're the ones who started it in the United States. We're the ones who started it. And I really think it sort of unfolded in the post-World War II era, where basically our country we are now the superpower. We are the richest country in the world after World War II. And we have the ability to start to consume meat on a level that no one else ever has. And you see this in other English-speaking countries. The UK and Australia eat meat on par with the United States. But now our cultural bad habits are spreading to emerging countries as they become more affluent. You see this happening in China. You see this happening in Brazil. They're eating a lot more meat than they used to. So what do you do when on a global level, you have this demand for meat that in terms of tons of meat per year, it is more than 7 times what it is in 1800. It's substantially more than that. And think of all the land that we need for that.
Yeah. So can you draw the line between meat consumption and the damage to the global microbiome and to each of our microbiomes?
Well, I mean, so I feel that meat consumption is causing damage to the global microbiome because of the amount of land that is required to sustain that. I mean, look, on such a simple level, let's just look at the Amazon rainforest and the fires that were occurring. You guys, this is a rainforest, all right? That is not California. Those are not brush fires. Those are not brush fires like that are spontaneously occurring. Those were man-made fires done with the intent to clear land for animal agriculture. And it's not the first year that they've had fires, but the issue is that they have new leadership in Brazil that basically is trying to capitalize on the global demand for meat. And they are the #1 exporter of livestock in the entire world. And in order to sustain that, I mean, basically what they're doing is they're propping up China and frankly, people in the United States. And in order to sustain that, they need more land. So they're cutting down the Amazon rainforest, and that is creating instability within the rainforest and the number of species that are going extinct as a result of that.
So if I'm in America and I'm signing petitions against Bolsonaro and cutting down the Amazon and I'm eating meat, that's pretty much like putting a no blood for oil sticker on my Hummer.
Right. Well, Howard, the argument that I'll hear people say is because I'll hear people who are upset about what's happening in the Amazon rainforest, and I'll just ask them, like, not confrontationally, but just ask them, like, so then why eat meat? And they'll go, oh, well, I get American meat. Mine comes from the United States. It's like, okay, guys, this is a global economy, right? There is supply and there is demand on a global level. And so if you are part of the demand, you are creating this, need for further supply. And it doesn't matter whether you eat American meat or Brazilian meat or, it could be from anywhere.
Right. If you're eating the American meat, then someone else isn't getting the American meat. And so they're going to need the meat from Brazil. It's
supply and demand, and it's on a global level. So, so you can't have it both ways. And I just feel like, where I get a little bit frustrated, Howard, is when we do this sometimes as individuals, and we do this as nation states, where we will point the finger at others, be like, you can't do that. All right. So like China right now, we are pointing the finger at China. How dare you have that wet market? That's disgusting. Look at the things that we're doing. You know what I mean? Look at the things that we're doing with our animal agriculture. You tell me that's not disgusting? Who are we to be pointing our finger? It's ridiculous.
So how does American animal agriculture contribute to threats to microbiome, to diversity?
Well, let's zoom in on the individual human microbiome for a moment.
Right.
Okay. And let's ignore this broader conversation about the environment and the effect on, our soil health and things of that variety. Let's just talk about what actually happens in your gut when you eat meat. There's a study that was done, it published in 2014, groundbreaking study. It was in the journal Nature, which is the top journal in the world, by Lawrence David and Peter Turnbull. And basically what they did is, you have to understand, we accept that our diet changes our microbiome now, okay? But the reason why we accept that is because of this study that I'm about to tell you about. In 2014, this was not accepted knowledge yet. And what they did is they basically took people and they put them on polar opposite extreme diets. 5 days of a 100% whole food, plant-based, no oil diet, okay? Then they would flip them over to the other side. 5 days of 100% animal products, meat, dairy, eggs, no veggies at all, none. And so they would do 5 days of each, and they checked their microbiome every single day to see what happened. All right, so number one, regardless of which diet you were on, your microbiome changed in less than 24 hours. In 1 day of changing your diet, you can alter your microbiome. The plant-based diet saw basically, like, as I said before, your dietary choices will define what your microbiome looks like. So the plant-based diet saw the enrichment of microbes that thrive on fiber. These are anti-inflammatory microbes. The reason why they're anti-inflammatory is because what they do is they consume the fiber and release short-chain fatty acids, which I was telling you about before with the immune system in the lungs. These are anti-inflammatory. The flip side was the animal product diet, okay? Remember, this is 5 days. We're not talking about 5 years. We're talking about 5 days. And what they saw was the emergence of specific types of bacteria that thrive in the setting of bile. Bile, which is a digestive juice produced by your liver, gets pumped out when you eat high-fat foods because it helps you to absorb fat. But bile, which comes from within your own body, bile alters the microbiome, and it will kill certain bacteria. The microbes that emerged on this animal product diet were what we call bilophilic. They thrive in this environment with bile. Mm-hmm. These are inflammatory microbes. An example of one is Bilophila wadsworthia. Bilophila wadsworthia was popping off the charts in this study and the animal product diet. And Bilophila wadsworthia has been clearly associated with inflammatory bowel disease. So in less than 5 days, you are already laying the framework for inflammatory bowel disease. They also saw that the bacteria that were emerging are ones that take bile and produce secondary bile salts. You guys, secondary bile salts are what is associated with the development of colorectal cancer. They are directly implicated in the pathogenesis, the development of colorectal cancer. So you are getting risk for inflammatory bowel disease. You are getting risk for colon cancer, all in less than 5 days. And then the last part, which was quite fascinating, is that they noticed that the microbes in the gut, when they were on the animal-based diet, developed antibiotic resistance. And they're like, gosh, what's the deal with that? We haven't given them any antibiotics. Why are they getting antibiotic resistance? Because 80% of the antibiotics in the United States are fed to animals or given to animals as a part of animal agriculture. It's a practice that's illegal in Europe, but we allow it in the United States. And we are breeding antibiotic resistance by casually using these antibiotics in our livestock. And in this study, what they showed is when you eat that meat, it affects your gut and can give you antibiotic resistance.
Meaning that when you then come across one of the bugs that's antibiotic resistant, that it will get you sick, and we don't have any more treatments for you. Right?
Exactly.
We've had like a 70-year history of um, like a arms race against bacteria, right? With stronger and stronger antibiotics. And now we've
We
run out.
That's right. So the drug development pipeline for antibiotics has dried up substantially. In my career over the last 20 years, there have been very few new antibiotics that have been developed. They've basically run out. And if you go back 100 years ago, the top causes of death were all infections. All right, that's what humans traditionally died of, and the life expectancy at that time was about 50 years of age. If you go back a little more than 100 years ago, and it was the development of penicillin that really started to transform things, where we could keep people alive to what we do now, which is 80 years on average. And so we may in the future, if we don't handle ourselves properly, be returning to a time where infections are the top causes of death because we don't have treatments.
All right, we're back after a little Skype glitch. Where were we?
Basically what I was saying is that, we created an environment where we really started to protect ourselves from infections using antibiotics. And now it's the overutilization of antibiotics that is breeding antibiotic resistance. And the main place where we are breeding antibiotic resistance is in these, basically livestock farms where they're administering the antibiotic. And you know what? You probably know this, Howard, but for the people at home who aren't familiar with why they're giving the antibiotics, they're not giving it for infections, guys. That's not what they're doing. They're giving the antibiotic because the livestock industry at this point is so ratcheted down on trying to make as much money as humanly possible. You cut whatever corner you can if it means that you can create more pounds of meat at lower cost. And so what they do is they give the antibiotic, and the antibiotic actually leads to the cow gaining 15% more weight off the same amount of food. And the reason why is because they're destroying the microbiome of the cow. I mean, it's the same as true in humans. If you destroy the microbiome of a human, they gain weight.
Yeah, I wanted to get into that a little bit. I want to leave enough time to actually talk about like all the positive things in the book, but I do want to get into this where you said like two people can be they've had studies where they've had isocaloric feeding and one group gains a lot more weight than the other because of the microbiome.
They have studies with isocaloric feeding where they give, so in humans, they have studies of isocaloric feeding where they give, you know, different meals, but they are calorically the same. And, for example, there's one that's a bean study, all right, where they looked at the effect of beans, and what they saw, isocaloric, they're feeding the same number of calories to people, and the group that gets the beans loses more weight than the other group, even though they're eating the same number of calories. And the reason that happens, we believe, is due to the effect on the microbiome. The same is true. Another example of this with the beans. So, what we're talking about is the metabolic effects of our microbiome. There's another thing that's called the second meal effect. Mm-hmm. And the second meal effect is where if you give a person beans at lunch, you will actually improve their blood sugar control at dinner, like the next meal. And the reason why is because of the effect on the gut microbiome. The beans have a positive anti-inflammatory effect on the gut microbiome. So, when it comes to our weight, the concept is like this. I view it as it is like we are swimming with a current. All right. The person who can eat whatever they want and get away with it is the person who's swimming with the current at their back and it's pushing them, and it looks like they're like a speed racer, whether they're a good swimmer or not.
Okay.
And the person who struggles and fights, and we all know these people, and I'm sure some of these people are listening right now. The person who struggles and fights and tries to change their diet and does everything within their power to try to lose weight and they still can't do it. That's like a person who's swimming against the current, and you're just hacking away, trying to swim and keep up, and you still can't move, and you're getting exhausted in the process. And the reason that this happens, the current is driven by the microbiome. Your gut microbiome affects how you react to your food, and it will affect your weight balance. But the good news is, as we talked about in the very beginning, Howard, you have the ability to change your microbiome.
Right. So let's get to that, because one like the other thing that really struck me about this book and what's going to change my practice is, so you talk about, like, you can eat ad libitum, you can eat as much as you want, you don't have to restrict, and you'll lose weight if you need to, get to an ideal weight, eating the fiber fueled way. Now, I've heard other doctors talk about this, like, Dr. McDougall talks about it. And I've heard a lot of, especially women, but men as well, say that's not true. I ate whole food plant-based and I didn't lose the weight, or when I ate ad libitum and I had to restrict. So there's a difference between whole food plant-based and what you're talking about.
So what I'm talking about is I'm talking about whole food, plant-based, no oil. Okay. And if you eat that way and you eat in abundance and in diversity.
That's the thing, the diversity, because a lot of people who eat whole food plant-based, I could have the same meal. And, you talked about, like, if all you ate was kale, like, people think, oh, kale is 1,000 on the Andy score, so kale is better than everything else. I think people are missing the importance of the diversity.
I agree with you. And I actually go so far as to say in my book that I think diversity is far more important than fixation on superfoods. You can say, oh, I need more kale, I need more kale. But the kale by itself is not going to be as good as if you had 5 different types of foods, even if no one considers them individually to be that great.
Right. And I think you're also saying that diversity is more important than a fixation on 100% vegan.
Well, diversity in the study, to be fair, okay, they looked at this in the American Gut Project study. So at the end of the day, as I've said, it's not my opinion, it's what the science says. In the American Gut Project study, the diversity of plants in your diet was a far stronger predictor of the health of your gut microbiome than whether or not you self-identified as being vegan. And the reason why is because at the end of the day, you can be vegan and eat a restricted diet, and that's not good for your gut. And we see this. I mean, Howard, we see this in people who are like these Instagram influencers, and they eat like a fruit-only diet or a raw-only diet. And then they have gut health issues, and they quit veganism saying that veganism is the problem. No, the problem is not veganism. The problem is that you weren't eating a healthy diet. That was not a healthy form of veganism.
Right. See, what I had thought until yesterday was, okay, so, I said, well, you don't have to be a healthy vegan, right? You could be a junk food vegan. And so, like, we don't want to be a junk food vegan. What I learned from you is you can be an unhealthy whole food plant-based eater.
You could be if you ate the same food all the time.
Which so many of us do.
Right. And well, this is where, for me, what was a game changer for me, Howard, is implementing this simple idea, as we talked about from the very beginning of the show. This is the golden rule. It's one rule, and it's super simple. Diversity of plants. So let me give you an example of how this plays out in my house. We're a normal family. Sometimes we have spaghetti and tomato sauce. All right. So we will get a organic whole wheat penne, and we'll get our tomato sauce. And that's 2 plants. That's not plant-based diversity, right? But it's not hard to throw garlic, onions, mushrooms, zucchini, maybe some greens, maybe some spinach or some kale. Throw that in your sauce and just let it simmer for 45 minutes. The house smells amazing. Your kids are salivating. They can't wait. And then when you serve it with some basil, some fresh parsley, and you just went from 2 up to like 9 different plants, and it tastes delicious. Everyone in the family is happy, and guess who's the happiest? Your gut microbes, because you're feeding them.
Right. And so you have the second half of the book really is the food plan. And so one of the things that I really love about it, and this is the biggest change in my practice in coaching people, is I just felt like if you're constipated, then what you need to do is switch immediately to a plant-based diet, and it will take care, like, jump all in. Like, behaviorally, I didn't believe that, like, because people need time. But if behavior was an issue, if you could just feed them, if you could put them somewhere and feed them, the ideal would be immediately switch to a whole food plant-based diet because that'll give you the biggest bang for your buck and change you quickly. And you convinced me that that's not a good idea.
Yeah, well, in my practice, I have seen, so of course I'm a gastroenterologist, right? So I'm seeing the people who are coming in with digestive issues, and virtually 100% of people who walk through the doors of my practice have dysbiosis. And when a person is constipated and you put them on a high fiber diet, they're just not able to do it. And they're going to be miserable. And that's the person who comes back and says, I tried your diet, it failed, now I'm trying something else. And you lost them. You missed your window of opportunity to convince them that a whole food plant-based diet is actually the right path to optimal gut health. People only have so much patience for this kind of stuff. So for me, when a person is constipated, this is actually one of the most important points, for people who are considering a whole food plant-based diet. If you have constipation, we need to deal with that. We need to deal with that. We need to get you into a rhythm and get you pooping. And then once we get you pooping and you're in that rhythm, now we can start to introduce fiber. Slow and low is the tempo, and we can ramp it up over time.
Right. And there was a bunch of foods that I have added to my diet since yesterday. So full disclosure, I was having a really hard time the last couple of weeks, just stuff in my life and the general pandemic depression and misery. And I was overeating on crap. I'd come back from South Africa a little bit sick, maybe COVID, I don't know. But I wasn't running. I was lethargic. I was miserable. As you write in the book, my gut microbiome was jet lagged. And so I was eating way too much crap. And so I decided, I stepped on the scale and I was like 10 pounds over the weight when I'd left. And I'm like, that's it. I'm not. And so I fasted for 36 hours. And then I said, I'm going to go raw for a couple of weeks. And I was raw for one day. And then I read the book and I'm like, well, maybe that's not the best idea. But I've since, we have some kimchi. I found a recipe for sourdough to do the starter. Talk a little bit about some of your, not to say that these are superfoods, but pretty, easy, fun, delicious things to add that most people are neglecting.
Well, so I have an entire chapter about fermented foods, which I'm a huge believer in. And when I say fermented foods, I'm really talking about fermenting your plants. So I love making like a good sauerkraut or a good kimchi. A surprising one are radishes. They're so easy to do. They're so easy to do. And the higher the fiber content of the food, the better it is when you ferment it. So a radish comes out crunchy, but it loses a lot of the spice that you have before you ferment it. And so they're delicious. So I'll often do them with like garlic, black peppers, like black peppercorns and dill to make almost like a pickle flavor. And so anyway, I love fermented foods. I think they're a nice addition to a healthy diet. I also am a big fan of broccoli sprouts. If people aren't doing broccoli sprouts, you should be. They're so easy to grow in your own home. It takes 5 days. It is so easy to do. And it's kind of fun. And if you have kids, your kids will be super into it too. So it's one thing that I enjoy.
That was the saddest part because I had done that like in 2015. And I bought this big bag from Johnny Selected Seeds. And I found the bag and it's still half full and they're all dead.
Oh,
so like
do it again.
$20. I gotta reorder.
Yeah.
Because you write about the link between the microbiome and cancer, right? And the sulforaphanes in the broccoli sprouts and all cruciferous, but specifically broccoli sprouts seems to be a really potent cancer fighter.
Yeah. So we know that these cruciferous vegetables, I'll rattle them off real quick, like broccoli and cauliflower and Brussels sprouts, and kale and arugula. These cruciferous vegetables we know contain cancer-fighting phytochemicals called glucosinolates. And the glucosinolates need to be activated to create their isothiocyanates, which is the active form. Well, guess what? Your gut microbes do the activation. Your gut microbes are capable of doing the activation. And so there's this one isothiocyanate. It is a cancer crusher, probably the most powerful cancer-fighting thing I've come across in all of nutrition, called sulforaphane. And you'll find it in broccoli. You'll find it as a result of consuming these cruciferous vegetables. But these broccoli sprouts, have 100 times, up to 100 times more sulforaphane than adult mature broccoli, which I find to be fascinating. So in our house, we love broccoli sprouts. They are consumed literally on a daily basis. We will put them into a smoothie that is enjoyed by the entire family in the morning. And I also love to throw them into soup or put them on top of a salad. And they're bitter. I've learned to embrace the bitter. But if you put them in a smoothie or if you put them in a soup, that really dulls the bitterness quite a bit.
Nice. So I have to admit also there are a couple of foods that I have basically felt a little bit guilty about. Like there's a hierarchy of like purity, right? Like, and sort of in my mind, I know this is not necessarily true, but in my mind, like raw vegan was the ultimate. Like we're all like, it's a religion and we're all trying to be holier.
Right.
And, and I see this at like vegan gatherings where the doctors will like not even being consciously aware of it, will sort of like try to be more strict than the next one. And so, like I said, I went raw until I read the book and I'm like, oh, I need some, we have a beautiful thing of beans and brown rice that my wife made, but I wasn't going to have it. And she makes her own tofu. And there was one of those like, oh, that'd be great, but I'm not going to have it because raw is better. But
right.
raw isn't better, is it?
It's different, and there's not necessarily superiority. So, let's take collards, for example.
Yeah.
Okay. You could eat the collards raw, or you could steam or saute the collards. There was a study done by a guy, Peter Turnbull. I mentioned his name a little bit earlier. Peter Turnbull did a study that I actually added. One of the last things that I added into my book was this study because it came out in the fall of 2019. And it basically what he showed is when you cook the food, you change the fiber. And that results in a difference in the microbiome. Every unique type of fiber will feed unique types of microbes. And so when you have collards and you steam or you cook them, you are transforming the fiber. So actually the superior idea is rather than saying one is better than the other, the superior idea is to have a little bit of both, because then you're getting more diversity of plants in your diet.
Beautiful. And the other thing that I've been sort of guilty about whenever I eat it is wheat. And like you talk a lot about wheat, gluten sensitivity, celiac. Could you give us the elevator pitch on wheat and why I should not be scared of whole wheat bread?
We've been hyperbolic in our response to the gluten fear. I mean, it really is a gluten fear. We've been told that this is just destroying our body, right? I'm not sitting here and telling you that we should have more gluten and maximize the gluten in our diet. But there's concerns. We have studies that show, Howard, that when people go gluten-free and they don't need to, they increase their risk of heart disease. That is the number one killer in the United States. The last thing that we need is to be increasing our risk of the number one threat to our life in the United States. That doesn't make any sense. And the reason why it's a mistake is that you're throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Wheat contains healthy compounds that are prebiotic that feed the microbes in our gut. And when we get rid of the wheat, we are getting rid of the number one source of whole grains. And if you don't replace that, your gut suffers as a result of that. So in my book, I go into great detail. And, let me just comment real quick since we're talking about it. This is a complex topic. Gluten is a complex topic. And when I sat down to write this part of the book, Howard, I'm not exaggerating when I tell you that I literally took several days and I just read without writing. I just read and I just sat there because at the end of the day, what I want is I want the highest quality science that I can deliver to you. This is not about proving an agenda. This is not about choosing the path a priori and then finding the studies to fulfill that path. This is the way science is meant to be. I'm a believer in real science. And the way that science is meant to be is check your bias at the door.
Yeah. And can I interrupt you for a second to just ask you to tell us your bona fides as a scientist? Because you're not, like, people are like, oh, you're a doctor, you're a gastroenterologist. You probably took like one stats course, in the late 90s, you weren't a clinician until you had been a researcher for like decades, right?
So the story goes like this. I graduated. I'll just walk you through. Here's the story. I graduated med school in 2006 at Georgetown. I was at Northwestern, and at Northwestern, I won the highest award in my residency. I was the intern of the year. They call it the Rombach Award. When that happened, it triggered a series of doors opening in front of me. One of the doors is they asked me to be the chief medical resident. The other thing that they did is they offered to pay for me to get a master's degree in clinical investigation. So someone comes to you and says, we will pay for you to get a degree from Northwestern University, one of the top universities in the United States. What do you say? You go, heck yeah, I'm doing it. So I signed up and I did night classes. And I'm not exaggerating. I would be on call in the ICU and I would go to my class, and sometimes my pager would go off and I'd have to run back to the ICU to take care of a patient. All right. So, and I did that for 2 years. I did that during my third year residency and during my chief residency. Then at that point, I was convinced that I was going to be a clinical researcher. So I went to the University of North Carolina and I was on a grant from the NIH. And I was studying at the Gillings School of Global Public Health, which is basically, if you look at the US News and World Report, if you believe in that kind of thing, and you look at schools of public health, every single year, you will always see the same top three. It's always the same top three. It's always UNC, Harvard, and Hopkins. Those are the top three, and they'll just rotate which is which. Right. So I was at UNC, and I basically was studying as an epidemiologist. So, basically I took a period of time for 18 months where I didn't take call. I barely took care of patients, and I was a full-time clinical researcher. I was studying at the School of Public Health. I was working with my mentor. I was publishing papers. That's what I did. And so I finished all my education in 2014. I graduated, and the short of it is this. It was not an easy choice. I disappointed a lot of people who mentored me, but I loved, in academia, you can't have it both ways. You can't be a researcher and a clinician. You have to choose. And so for me, I loved taking care of patients too much to give it up.
Right.
And so I decided to follow that path.
Right. And you've also, embodied the idea of diversity, right? You have a research background and a clinical background. And I'm sure you've learned things from both that you couldn't have learned from either by themselves.
Well, the research background, I feel, empowers me where when I'm writing this book, I reviewed over 1,000 studies to write this book. And there are more than 600 references, which, by the way, anyone who wants my references, you can have them right now completely for free. Go to theplantfedgut.com. And you don't have to buy the book. Just you go ahead and download the references, theplantfedgut.com. So I feel like my research background helped me because it allowed me to become the interpreter. And when it comes to complex topics like gluten, I became the interpreter. I'm reading this. There's a high level of complexity, and I'm coming out and I'm going to break it down and I'm going to show you what's actually going on. So.
Right. So anyway, back to, I forget what we were on. You got to go, huh? Okay. I have so many more questions, and they will have to wait, or maybe Rip asked them, and I'll go find out there. But tell us a little bit more about like the book. I guess I'm going to be releasing this on the 12th, right? The day that your book comes out.
Well, I'll tell you what, Howard, you just let me know when you want to record and do more questions. I'm more than happy to do it. If your community, or we could do it live with your community if you ever want to do that. Whatever you want to do, you just let me know.
Hell yeah.
So that'd be fun. If you want to do it next week when you like the week of the that you release the podcast, I'm happy to do that. And we could do live Q&A with your community. Fiber Fueled, guys, is now, it's out on May 12th, which it sounds like is the day that this podcast is out. That's the name of the book. Fiber Fueled is available through all the major book retailers, Amazon, Barnes & Noble.
Want to hold it up for the people watching?
Yeah. My personal favorite is, so you can buy it wherever you prefer. I am grateful no matter where you buy it from. But the one thing I will say is, because it's COVID-19, I love it when people buy it from their local bookstore.
Nice.
Because we should keep them, if you're going to buy a book, buy it from the local guy. Amazon is richer than they've ever been right now. Your local bookstore is on the verge of going out of business. And someday you're going to want to mosey on into that bookstore and have a cup of coffee and read a book. and you got to support them if you want that to be the case.
Yeah, and you want your local bookstore owner and employees to be able to buy from you too.
Exactly. Goes both ways.
Beautiful. I love that. So, Will Bulsiewicz, thank you so much. As I said, like this book has changed how I approach helping people get healthy. I think it's going to be the book that people are going to give to other people. I mean, we've had wonderful plant-based science books for 2 decades now, and yours is based on such new, exciting science that it kind of explains things that other books kind of glossed over because we just didn't know. So it's a triumph. It is such a beautiful addition to the genre, and it's going to help a lot of people. So thank you so much for the work you put in and for taking the time today.
It's my pleasure, Howard. It's my pleasure, man. I appreciate you saying all that. It means a lot, and I hope people enjoy the book. And when you read the book, reach out to me and let me know what you think, because I love hearing from people.
Awesome. Also, I just want to say it's a hilarious book. Like it's just full of dad jokes. It's so sweet. It's sweet and funny and a great read, and everyone should just get it.
Thanks, man.